All right, let's get right into it. For the first time since 1972, we are standing on the edge of a world with absolutely no limits on the nuclear arsenals of its two biggest powers. Seriously, just think about that for a second. A full half-century of painstakingly negotiated arms control is about to just disappear.
And that really is the question, isn't it? What happens when all the guardrails come off? When the United States and Russia, who, by the way, own about 90% of all nuclear weapons, have no binding treaty to hold them back? The heart of the problem is this. The whole system we built to manage nuclear competition, to avoid deadly misunderstandings, it's all falling apart. This isn't about just one treaty. No, this is about the end of an entire philosophy of global security. And we've got a deadline, a very hard deadline. The new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, we all call it New START, is the very last agreement we have. And on February 4th, 2026, it's gone. For good. The clock is absolutely ticking. So, to really get a handle on what we're about to lose, we need to talk about what we had. What did this treaty actually do, and why was it so vital for keeping a lid on things? You know, New START didn't just pop up out of thin air. It was built on decades of work. It all started with SALT-I back in the 70s, the first real shot at taming the Cold War madness. Then you had the INF Treaty in '87, a huge deal that actually got rid of an entire category of weapons. After the Soviet Union collapsed, START-I made massive cuts. New START, signed in 2011, became the final crucial piece holding that whole structure of restraint together. And the rules were crystal clear. The treaty set these hard caps: 1,550 deployed warheads, 700 deployed long-range missiles and bombers. But here's the real secret sauce: verification. It allowed for up to 18 on-site inspections every year. See, this wasn't about blind trust. It was about being able to prove the other side was keeping their word. And that's what made the treaty so valuable. It wasn't just the numbers. It was the transparency. It gave each side a clear window into what the other was doing, which stopped them from always assuming the worst and building more weapons just in case. It created a predictable, stable environment. And that stability is exactly what's at risk now. So what does a world without those limits actually look like? Well, the answer's pretty simple and, frankly, pretty terrifying. A new arms race that could spin up much faster than you think. This is where a term called upload capacity becomes really important. Both the US and Russia have thousands of extra nuclear warheads just sitting in storage. New START didn't limit these reserves, but it did limit the number of missiles and bombers you could put them on. Once the treaty's gone, that limit disappears, and all those reserve warheads can be loaded onto existing systems at shocking speed. Just how fast are we talking? Well, the quickest way is by air. In just a few weeks, the United States could add a whopping 480 warheads to its bomber fleet. It's as simple as moving them from a warehouse to a runway. No dialogue, VO/11 continues over this slide. And that's just for starters. The next move would be out at sea. Within about 6 months, another 950 warheads could be loaded onto the existing submarine fleet. Because right now, those subs are sailing with a lot of empty slots. No dialogue. VOIC/13 continues over this slide. Okay, let's add that up. In just half a year, the US alone could slap over 1,400 more deployed warheads onto its arsenal. And here's the kicker. Russia can do pretty much the same thing on a nearly identical timeline. The floodgates would be wide open. I mean, just look at these numbers. It's pretty stark. Both countries could essentially double their deployed strategic arsenals. And they could do it fast, with weapons they already have. This isn't some far-off what-if. It's a real, ready-to-go capability that could be unleashed, kicking off a dangerous new spiral of escalation. So we're basically heading for a cliff. Is there any way to slam on the brakes? Can we restart some kind of arms control in this new and way more complicated world? Well, trying to negotiate a new treaty is tough because the two sides want to talk about completely different things. The US is focused on Russia's fancy new weapons and its huge stockpile of smaller tactical nukes. Russia, they want to talk about US missile defense, our long-range conventional missiles, and they even want to bring the UK and France's arsenals into the mix. They're just not on the same page at all. So if a formal treaty isn't going to happen before the deadline, what's left? Do we just cross our fingers and hope for the best, or is there another path? One idea gaining traction is this two-track approach. On track one, you get the big bosses on board, the leaders of the US, Russia, and this is key, China,
all publicly agree on some basic principles for keeping things stable. At the same time, on track 2, you get the technical experts together to work on real, concrete ways to lower the risks, like better hotlines or rules of the road to avoid accidents. Look, it's not a treaty, but in a world with no rules, it's a pretty critical place to start. And this really brings us to the final crossroads. We are at a moment in history where the choices made in the next year or so are going to define global security for a generation. And now the whole game is complicated by a third major player, China. Now, while its arsenal is growing fast, you can see it's still way smaller than what Russia and the US have. That's why China has always said, hey, you guys have way more than us. You cut yours down to our level, then we'll talk. The danger now is that a new US-Russia arms race just gives China an excuse to build up its own arms race even faster. But even with all this tension, there is one fundamental belief that everyone still seems to share. A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. That powerful line, first spoken by Reagan and Gorbachev, was just reaffirmed recently by all the big nuclear powers, the US, Russia, China, the UK, and France. When you get down to it, they all agree on the ultimate stakes. Which leaves us with this final, massive question. Will the world's nuclear powers figure out a new way to show restraint, to manage this dangerous competition without any formal rules? Or are we about to watch the starting gunfire on a new, incredibly dangerous and destabilizing nuclear arms race? The choice is stark, and that clock is ticking down fast.